Now we will look at the incomplete or inaccurate representation. To start with a very basic example, that sometimes incomplete sentence represent incomplete information. And how can we come up with incomplete sentence and draw or elicit incomplete information? One common fragment error that occurs is when a writer thinks that a dependent clause is a complete sentence. Reason is that sometimes the ambiguity arises because the dependent clause has a verb and has a noun. To give you an example, because the king refused to hand over power. Now, looking at this fragment, you will see that it contains the noun and the verb. And sometimes the writer would think that it is a complete sentence. But the word because the king refused to hand over power, you assess and you think that there is something more that needs to be attached. So that something is basically the independent clause that needs to be added or attached to the dependent clause to form a complete sentence. So in this case, you can say people protested because the king refused to hand over power. So this kind of incomplete interpretation of a fragment or incomplete representation can cause ambiguity or analysis of unintended meaning. We also need to keep in mind that the independent clause can either come at the start or it can also be added at the end of the sentence as well. Recent research suggests that we sometimes develop incomplete or inaccurate representations of the sentences we encounter. So it's not only the syntactic arrangement, but also the representation can lead to the misinterpretation on the part of the reader. This is more commonly the case when the sentence violates our expectations. Now we will discuss some of the points that are related to incomplete or inaccurate representation. Now, as we have already discussed in the form of garden path and other processes that are involved in reading comprehension, we see that comprehenders sometimes misinterpret garden path sentences because they seem to be grammatically correct, but they are temporarily ambiguous because at the start they convey a different meaning, and by the time you reach the end of the sentence, you come to know the actual meaning of that. Now, looking at this particular example, which is while Anna dressed the baby played in the crib. Pereira and her colleagues, they have called this assumption into question, and they suggested that misinterpretation may persist even after syntactic reanalysis has taken place. Now, while Anna dressed the baby played in the crib, when Christensen and their colleagues presented participants with this sentence, which is Anna dressed the baby played in the crib. As with other garden path sentences, what was noticed that comprehenders initially assumed that Anna dressed the baby. It is assumed that they re-examine the sentence and eventually correct this interpretation. They gave the participants questions such as, did the baby play in the crib, or did Anna dress the baby? Participants were virtually 100% correct in responding that the baby played in the crib, but many answered the second question incorrectly. So performance on active sentences was nearly 100% correct. Active sentences. But errors rate of 25% were found with the passive sentences. The man bit the dog. The man was bitten by the dog bit the man. The dog was bitten by the man. Now looking at these 2 points, the significance of incomplete or inaccurate representation is twofold. First is naturalistic situation. People frequently misinterpret what others are saying for a host of reasons. It could be they are distracted by others, some noise in the environment, some comments, and so on. Then you have the second one, where you see the incomplete representation emphasizes the influence of expectations in the sentence comprehension. So second is related to the expectations. When sentences that do not match our expectations are presented, we sometimes misinterpret them initially and ultimately correct ourselves, especially as the original garden path strategies suggest. So you look at the expectations which you have towards certain forms in the reading comprehension when you are reading a sentence, and when those expectations are not matched or not fulfilled, then you tend to initially form misinterpretation and then ultimately correct it towards the end of your comprehension. To conclude, we have syntactic, semantic, and pragmatic knowledge to comprehend sentences. An ongoing debate is whether we use these forms of knowledge simultaneously or whether we process syntactic information first.